Good afternoon, everybody. Next Wednesday's reflection will be the last of our reflections, and this weekend will be the last of our 12 o'clock televised masses. We've decided that this is what we need to do, with lots of things coming up, one thing in another, and I hope you don't mind about that. But that's how we feel it's been. It's been a long 20 months. I know we're not out of the woods yet, and people have tuned into this from different parts of Europe and even from the world. So thank you very much for doing that. That's really good to hear, and I hope it's been helpful to you. Huge thanks to Mark for the hours he spent editing the YouTube broadcasts on Wednesdays and Saturdays on our behalf. Also to Joe and Tim for their help. I never intended it to go on for this long, but it just took on a life of its own. So other concerns, as I say, are now on us, so we can't continue with the programme as it's been, and I hope you'll understand that. Should things change and we get put back into lockdown, obviously we will reassess and maybe restart this programme, so watch this space. Next week we're going to conclude by reflecting on the title of these sessions, I Have My Mission. What is mission and what is my mission, and how can I fulfil it in the 21st century? And today I just wanted to do a sort of recap, but also to say a few personal things to you about my own story and what it's meant, particularly during this time. On a Monday evening, early in September 1969, I was working till late in a pub hotel with my dad in the bar. The very next night, I was dressed in a black frock and expected to go to bed in silence at 9:30. Talk about a mega shock. That first evening in Oscott College was a real shock. Going to this room with a sort of hospital bed and large iron bedstead and one desk, one chair, one sink, and had to put all this funny gear on me. It was incredible, really. And we were supposed to go to bed in silence. Fortunately, the chap in the room opposite stuck his head round the door and said, "Do you want a cup of coffee?" I thought I'd be delighted. And it's so strange to think of that now, in 1969. And in that period that I was there, those 6 years to 75, it was a period of unbelievable and rapid social and spiritual change. There was a huge sense of freedom. We had flower power, if you remember. There was great music, no doubt about that. There was still the Vietnam War. And in the church, the Latin Mass was still in existence until the first Sunday of Advent, 1969. And there were so many other things. It was a time of innocence before selfishness finally overtook us. There was still a lot of post-war generosity. Doors were open. People helped each other instinctively. It was a good time. It was a good time. Of course, there was no colour television, no video recorders, no internet, no personal computers, none of the things we now take for granted, like mobile phones and social media. But by the time I'd changed and I'd left college, everything had changed irrevocably. And I wrote a lot of this down in the book that I published recently called Nothing Like This Before, which is the story of Spand and how that time in college was a very blessed time. It gave me an insight that I would not otherwise have had if I had not been on the streets of Birmingham working with people, wonderful people. So I arrived in my first parish in Woodseats in Sheffield in August 1975 with a guitar and a motorbike, and yes, long hair too. It was an exciting time to be a Christian and a Catholic just after the Vatican Council. People did things together and they enjoyed it. And there was a clear vision of the church as a family, looking after each other and serving our Lord. My first parish priest was years ahead of his time. He set up little groups in the parish called cells, which met every fortnight and to discuss things and to work things out together. They set up an outreach group to look after things outside the parish. And it was a varied community and a wonderful, wonderful experience. And he also told me all those years ago to prepare myself for the time when there would be no more priests, which of course has now happened. Next week I'm going back to that church and that parish to celebrate the funeral of a dear friend, Angela McKinney, who helped knock the edges off me when I was a young sprog and been a wonderful friend and support ever since. After 3 years, I was moved to Nottingham, and the situation was entirely different. The parish priest was not as open-minded. He could be quite a difficult person in many ways. His curates would beg the bishop to leave after 3 years, and I stayed there 11 years because I kept my mouth shut. It was, and all the things that I'd learned were being nullified. It was a difficult period. I was saved by Spand, starting the word with Spand in Father Owen O'Neill's office, by rugby, of course, by great people, and the friendship of a truly remarkable man, who is, of course, Father Brian. We did plays in the parish, organised these overnight Trent walks, started the work of Spand, worked and worked and worked in schools, 3 schools and parishes, and making great friends along the way. And despite the domestic difficulties, it was still a joyous time, still a time of dreams and visions of what we could do and be together, and so many people bought into it. We did some pretty crazy things, but they were great things, and it was a good time in that respect. And so as the years have gone by in my ministry and in the world, things have changed dramatically, and not always for the better. Individualism was born in the 1980s, making us think of ourselves alone and not bothering about anybody else. And it seems to have taken an insatiable hold on us now. Consumerism accompanied it, having to buy, having to have, along with a sense of entitlement. I'm entitled to this. Technological development has continued at a relentless pace, with now phones drugging our children and social media taking over our lives. This has caused immense problems, so much so that we're not even able to see or recognise them. And now, introspection and dissatisfaction, a sort of culture of complaint and outrage has emerged. We've become angry people, difficult and demanding, who will not see what they do not want to see. I remember being quite horrified just before last weekend, reading a piece in the paper saying that 65% of people said they would not change their lives in order to accommodate the recommendations of COP26. They really did not care that they were destroying the planet. Didn't want to see it, didn't want to accept it, and didn't want to do anything meaningful about it. We've also seemed to become fascinated with banality and celebrity, and somehow hiding in a fake world because the real one is too frightening. We will do what we want to do, whatever the implications of that, and we do not care about the effect it has on others. So many times I find myself asking, what has happened to us? What has happened to us? We seem to be living in a world that's lost its soul and heading relentlessly towards inevitable personal and global catastrophe. With regard to the life of faith, millions of people have drifted away from institutional religion or sought other means of spiritual fulfillment. In the Catholic Church in particular, the spectre of the abuse of our children by members of the clergy and religious has all but removed our credibility, and it may never be recovered, despite the efforts and example of countless innocent and devoted priests and people. And many people now view a life in the church not as a family, but just another thing in the diaries to be followed only when it suits them, for events like baptism and First Communion, and a passport to perceive good education in the Catholic schools. And they become puzzled, even angry, when this inconsistency and hypocrisy is pointed out to them, as in a recent letter I wrote to them, which was quite blunt. You have to be blunt round here, you know. You have to be blunt. And said, if you're not part of this community, baptism is not possible. Because baptism is bringing a child into a community. First communion is not possible because you're not in communion with it. And people get angry about that. But it's actually facing up to the truth. As Father Brian says, maybe the church isn't for you. Who ever heard of a family that stays together as a family and never eats together? It's absurd, isn't it? And the fact is, we do not think that the word church refers to me, to us, but as some sort of remote institution out there to which we attach ourselves from time to time. And the great sadness to me at the moment is that this church that I love, this family, is becoming an institution. And more to the point, it seems to be becoming a business that has little to do with following our Lord. We get copious communications from the diocese about a whole range of matters that are not ultimately important. And we have to respond, we have to do this. In 3 days this week, 4 people have died, including our oldest parishioner, Mrs. Lily Hallam, aged 107. What a dear soul she was. And so when that happens, things about Legionella coming from the diocese are totally irrelevant. But unfortunately, they don't seem to get that. And we're in danger of being smothered by bureaucracy and at the same time being repeatedly told that we're a missionary church on a synodal path. How can that happen? Pope Francis has seen this. He calls us self-referential. He abhors the spectre of clericalism, where the clergy got themselves into a sort of elite group, feeling superior to others. He wants us to be a field hospital, looking after each other and serving the Lord first and foremost. And in so doing, he's encountered much opposition from within and without, but he remains the one prophetic voice to whom we should all listen for wisdom and guidance. Time and time again over these last 20 months, I've spoken to you about the same thing, the need to change our minds and how we see and do things. That is fundamental. It's the key to our survival as Christians and also as a civilization. We simply cannot go on the way we've been doing, both in the church and in society. We have to do things differently. We have to be willing to make sacrifices and break away from the stifling self-indulgence and self-interest that has all but crushed us, even though we do not see it or recognize it for what it truly is. Greta Thunberg pointed this out repeatedly in Glasgow in regard to saving our planet. But who's going to listen to her? So what happened to that young man who began his ministry 46 years ago, full of hopes and dreams? He's become older, much older, weary and worn out from fighting what I see is a brick wall, cultivated indifference and selfishness. It's taken roots in the hearts of everyone. This life now is a life of sadness and great loneliness. And I have to say that if I did not love you, my people, and believe me, I do love you, I would seriously contemplate retiring and walking away from the pain of it tomorrow. And that is the honest truth. I do not feel I can work in this situation for much longer, as it has all but destroyed me. But, there has to be a but. That is not the whole picture. There remain signs of hope. There are people we can look up to, well known or not, people within our own communities of great goodness and kindness still, people who do not turn away from the Lord and his way, but live it, often heroically every day, engaged still in the life of prayer and faith. There are children who need to find real love and a future, young people with so much goodness in them looking for hope, people in need both near and far away, to whom the outstretched hands of the Lord's love needs to be extended. It's easy to become despondent when you see what is going on all around us, and even within ourselves. But this cannot be the whole story or the end of our endeavours. What is necessary for us is that we discover and live that family church life again, that we learn to pray deeply to a God who is not seen to be the solution of our problems or the provider of our needs, but a Father who loves and cares for us even when life is desperate. So many good things are still happening. Look at the Alternativity event last weekend, for example. Think about the efforts being made in our schools to help our children and families live in our Lord's ways. The plays for our young people and adults to help them to see the truth of our situation and live with it. The work of Spand, the groups now getting together again after lockdown and rediscovering the joy of personal contact and friendship. All is certainly not lost. I've always seen myself as a sort of facilitator, if you like, whose job is to find ways of bringing people together so that the Lord can do what he needs to do with them and for them. And that still takes place, thankfully, and will need to continue. Coming out of lockdown with the spectre of COVID-19 still in front of us is a difficult thing. Some people remain anxious and afraid, even paranoid about it. It's caused others to be tetchy and nitpicking, obsessive even, while others still seem to be blithely unaware of the danger that is still there. The fact is that we have to live with this. For a while it was a warning to us, and of course unprecedented. We resented what we could not control and demanded action, even when there was no action to be found. We closed our eyes to others and literally locked ourselves away in our homes and in our minds. We may not be locked away in our homes at present, but very many people are still locked in their own mindset, which is troubling. How to break out of this way of thinking and living is the crucial question. From a personal point of view, at the beginning of Holy Week in 2020, I took a solemn vow in this church to go on regardless, as I simply could not sit in the priory, locked away from people I love who were suffering, most notably at the time, of course, our dear brother, Father Terry. I'm very thankful that I've managed to avoid this condition so far, but also conscious of the onset of other health issues which have caused some problems. What do you expect when you're 70 and still working like a maniac? So all of us have to think and act differently. There is no other way for us, and we must do it together as a family. And that's why these reflections were entitled, I Have My Mission, and how we're going to bring them to an end next week.